All right, hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about some reproductive hormones and go over the menstrual cycle hormones and kind of show how that works. I just wanted to start here with some pituitary hormones and just show you the overview of this again. Remember, the hypothalamus is that brain control center that receives sensory input from your body and then tells your pituitary to do things, to release things, right? And so the two main ones that we're going to talk about today are LH and FSH, and these, if you've read your book, control the production of the follicle in the ovary and ovulation. And it's important to note also, okay, though even though these guys have an effect here, they also have an effect on the testes, which then will produce testosterone, okay? But back to this stuff. This is what we're going to focus on today. This is kind of a complex cycle, so I just want to make sure to give you guys a little rundown. So this is an ovary, and it's kind of a creepy diagram. Like, this reminds me, have you guys seen All Real Monsters? You remember that? That was pretty old, but anyway. In this ovary, you have a bunch of these tiny little follicles, and they're basically a group of cells that have an egg inside, and these would be all throughout this whole thing. This diagram is just showing kind of the transition of the follicle. So as the follicle grows, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, okay, and then eventually the follicle ruptures and releases this egg. The ovum is liberated. So it releases the egg. I'll show you where it goes next, because it's like, where is it going? It looks like it's just escaping. But then the ruptured follicle, turns into the corpus luteum. And this thing is another structure that produces progesterone. And that has another role in the menstrual cycle. But the corpus luteum has a finite lifespan. And that's important. And I guess we'll talk about that later. So here's the next thing. So this is the ovary, right? So that whole thing is this that we are looking at. And so here's the ruptured egg, not the ruptured egg, the ruptured follicle releasing the egg. And then these fimbriae, these are these little finger-like projections that kind of cover the ovary. They go over the ovary and they catch these eggs. And then they guide them in here into the fallopian tube, right? It's called the fallopian tube. And actually in the fallopian tube is where you can see right here, the egg is fertilized. And then eventually, as this thing moves down the fallopian tube, you can see that it's growing in size, 2, 4, 8 cells. And then eventually, hopefully, if that's the goal, it will implant in the uterine wall, in the endometrium. Okay, so that's just an overview of kind of how everything is working. Just so you see a big picture. Okay, so now let's get into some details. All right, some things to know. I like this diagram because it shows anterior or the pituitary hormones here, and then ovarian hormones here. Here we see the uterine cycle, which is it's showing the thickness of the endometrium, which is the lining of the uterine wall, and so we want to start here in the first couple of days. We see that it actually starts with the shedding of the layer from the previous cycle. So this is a menstrual period, right? Menses. And so the first thing, let's go to the pituitary hormones that we're going to follow, is the FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone. And it does exactly what it sounds like, which is to stimulate the growth of the follicle. Remember, the follicle has this egg inside right here, and as it gets bigger and bigger, as the follicle gets bigger and bigger, what it does is it produces estrogen. So that's this estradiol right here. It's just estrogen, and as the follicle grows, we get this thing growing bigger and bigger and bigger, or the amount of estrogen growing in the blood. And so what that is going to cause is the pituitary to release luteinizing hormone in this big spike. Okay, so the spike of luteinizing hormone happens, and that causes ovulation. So the follicle ruptures, the egg is released into the fimbriae catch it, and and the follicle turns into the corpus luteum. Okay, so this new structure that we have here is going to start producing progesterone, and it also produces estrogen. Not quite as much as we had before, but that's what we got. Oh, I forgot to mention this drops so rapidly, obviously, because the follicle is what was previously producing the estrogen, and then it just ruptures. So we have a momentary drop, but then the corpus luteum picks back up where the follicle left off. And now you'll see with this addition of progesterone, one of the main things that it does is grow the lining here. It grows the endometrium thicker and thicker in preparation for implantation of the blastocyst, the fertilized egg that's now grown into like a little ball of cells. However, the corpus luteum has a limited lifespan, okay? It doesn't just go on forever. It doesn't just keep growing and growing. So once it starts to degrade, that means that the progesterone and the estrogen start to drop off, and that is going to cause another menstrual period where you shed the lining there. Okay, so this goes back down. All right, I think that's pretty good for that. Let's go on to the next page. So here, something that you'll for sure be asked about is negative and positive feedback in this cycle, okay? So let me just kind of go over this really quick. So we got the hypothalamus, obviously, causes the pituitary to produce FSH that grows the follicle. So the follicle is growing, and the follicle then produces estrogen. That's the goal. That's one of the goals of growing the follicle, is producing estrogen. And so one of the things that estrogen is going to do is going to cause negative feedback on the pituitary, so that we don't need, so that the pituitary does not produce any more FSH. Remember, the goal of FSH was to grow the follicle and produce estrogen, and if we've done that, we no longer need FSH. So that is a negative feedback. The other thing it does is at the mid-cycle, you saw that jump in LH, right? So estrogen is causing a positive feedback, or it is making the pituitary produce LH. Okay, LH was that one in the middle. And so LH causes ovulation, and it turns the follicle into the corpus luteum. It causes that change, and then corpus luteum is producing progesterone and estrogen, and those things are going to cause negative feedback on FSH and LH. And the reason for that is because we're in the middle of a cycle when this is happening, and the uterus is waiting for, or I guess the egg is waiting for implantation or fertilization, and we don't need that to happen. We don't need, remember, FSH causes the follicle to grow, and so we don't need that to be happening while we're in the middle of another cycle. So let's summarize a little bit. So estrogen is going to cause negative feedback on FSH in the beginning here, and then we have estrogen is going to cause positive feedback on luteinizing hormone, and then we have progesterone mainly here, and well, let's just say also estrogen are going to cause negative feedback on FSH and LH. All right, there's a little summary. So, guys, there's like a lot of steps in this. Make sure you practice going through all the steps and explaining the whole thing like in order, okay? Practice with somebody. Go explain to your brother, how a period works. They'll love that, and it'll help you learn. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions, please, and have a great day. Bye.